KPRL presents Sound Off, the longest-running radio talk show in San Luis Obispo County. Sound Off on the North County's choice for local talk, KPRL. The views and opinions expressed on Sound Off do not necessarily reflect those of KPRL, its management, staff, or sponsors.
Welcome to Sound Off. My name is Karen Velie. I'm your host on Wednesday and Thursday afternoons. I'm also an investigative reporter with Cal Coast News. Go to Cal Coast News. There is no paywall. And today I'm going to have on the show Debbie Peterson. Debbie Peterson is the former mayor of Grover Beach. She also wrote a book about the corruption in the county. As issues with corruption became rampant, there were people coming to her saying that they were asked to bribe others to pay for votes on the city council for pot shops. She said she could not work in a city government with this type of actions going on. And then, as many know, in the end, one of the men that won many of the votes over there was Helios Dayspring. He did finally admit to bribing Adam Hill, and he did say that he talked to others about paying bribes, and he did go to prison for corruption. We're going to start by talking about the Coastal Commission and issues with the Coastal Commission. And for those that don't know, the Coastal Commission is the California Coastal Commission has oversight over property along the coastline. And over time, they became very aggressive with a stance. Nobody should have a house on the ocean. We want to not allow any seawalls, and as the houses fall into the ocean, we can then have nobody living in the ocean and all coastline for everyone to enjoy. And so what has happened then is they started blocking people from having seawalls, and there became a lot of lawsuits. And one of the people suing is Gary Grossman of Grover Beach. Not Grover Beach, of Pismo Beach. He has a house on the bluffs over in the Shell Beach part of Pismo Beach. And in 2002, he filed a lawsuit against the Coastal Commission. And in that lawsuit, he was able to put a seawall up on his property. And as part of that seawall, the neighbor, though, is an 80-year-old man, was not able to put a seawall up. He's 80 now. And the waves kept crashing onto the bluffs, and they went up behind his seawall and have created a cave under his house. So he again attempted to do he asked them he wanted to repair the seawall, and they said, no, you can't just repair the seawall, because if your house crashes into the ocean, the quality of beach sand that would be made by your house, by the cliffs in front of your house collapsing, the sand is worth $1.3 million, and they ordered him to give them $1.3 million to build a seawall to make up for the sand that the beach would miss by his house not being destroyed. So he fought for years, and he had told me a couple years ago his 80-year-old neighbor could not afford this, and he wasn't going to move forward and do what they wanted. And case law is absolutely showing that. Case law after case law, the Coastal Commission has overstepped their bounds, and they are harming people in the community. And so he said, though, case law is on his side, but basically time is not. This was a decision. He's lived in the home for 29 years. The cave is getting deeper underneath his house. And then the Coastal Commission said for a little under $600,000, you pay that to Pismo Beach for walkways to the beach and other things, and we'll allow you to do your seawall. Here's the point. If you're a multi-millionaire or a billionaire, you can keep a house on the beach. If you're a poor person, you can't afford to have a house on the beach. There's a bit of inequality here. that only wealthy will be able to live on the beach and the money counts. And one of the things that in one of the lawsuits it was said, you can only charge them the money that it's actually you're gonna lose. They could go buy a couple truckloads of sand and I'm sure it wouldn't be $500 and some $1,000. And I have Debbie Peterson. She is in the studio. Debbie, thank you for coming in today.
My pleasure, always.
And what do you think about pay for a seawall because of the sand?
Well, I have a whole lot to say about that. What I would say is, I have some property in Hawaii, and they import sand from Australia. And I suspect, in Hawaii they do this, I suspect that it doesn't cost them $500,000 necessarily. So, but I also have to say about that, if we're talking about a tiny little bit, a few feet of seawall, I think with thousands of miles of coastline, we don't want to see seawalls all the way along the coast. But I think that allowing someone to protect their property, I'm a real estate broker, allowing someone to protect their property, both in law and just in principle as a realtor, is only right.
And what I have noticed is it's good for government. So when government has a property that they want to protect on the ocean, they allow people to put giant boulders. So it doesn't look like a seawall. They put giant boulders up protecting the cliffs from failing.
Well, yeah, and then no one can walk, because there's giant boulders. If they do, they slip and slide, they break their leg, they break their neck. I don't see that really as a particularly constructive or healthy solution, and certainly not visually appealing.
But I don't think on some of these cliffs, there's only a small amount of the day when anybody could even find any way to get down on that little bit. Mm-hmm. When you're talking on the cliffs, these are not beaches people are hanging out on.
No, they're beaches they're beaches that I've probably only ever been down on in the 50 years I've been toing and froing from all over the world to here. There is, I don't think I've gone down to that beach even once. Not once down there. I know some surfers head down there from Pismo. But it's not hurting the surfers. They're allowed. They can keep surfing.
It's very interesting that this is going on. And one of the arguments I've been told by attorneys is that the California Constitution gives people the right to protect their property. You have a legal right to protect your property. And is the legal right paying a large sum of money to a government body to allow you to protect your property? Because then again, it's probably going to cost them, $1 million for the seawall?
Well, yeah, and I think it goes a step further than a legal right. I think you have a legal responsibility to protect your property. And if you don't, you have some liability. So it does cut both ways on that. But I think, Karen, the thing that it struck me this morning, and I've talked to a couple of people since who I don't think they'll have time to call in today because they're working. But what struck me this morning is, well, for $500,000, you can buy the Coastal Commission. You can buy a seawall. At that same time that Gary Grossman is paying them $500,000, they are building the most incredibly high walls, probably higher than those cliffs, 64 feet high in some cases, all along Grand Avenue. Gary Grossman is being allowed by the Coastal Commission. The Coastal Commission is rubber stamping in violation of their own principles and ethics. He's being allowed to build 50 to 64-foot buildings, hugely massed, both vertically and horizontally, along Grand Avenue and Grover Beach. Grand Avenue will be lined with cliffs. They let him put up cliffs.
It is interesting when they say it's all about views and they allow giant, part of what there's two things. The Coastal Commission has been very clear. We want the beach to be open to everybody. But they're not doing that by only letting the rich build seawalls, the wealthy. But the other thing is, if it's all about views of the ocean, why would you allow giant structures close to the water?
Exactly. And it gets worse than that, because in 2004, the people of Grover Beach came together. They created a community vision, and they said, we really only want 2 to 3 story buildings, but we'll allow 4 stories along 4th and Grand. But the massing's very important. We still want to remain a friendly little beach town, and we still want people to be able to see the ocean when they drive along the streets of Grover Beach. And then that was reiterated in the local coastal program that we approved, or that the Coastal Commission approved when I was the mayor, both of these are still part of the Grover Beach Code, but they're being completely violated with these buildings all along Grand Avenue. And I guess many of them are in the coastal zone, and the Coastal Commission's just rubber stamping it, which I don't understand, because they explain that one of the richest resources we have in Grover and Pismo, and you all know it because the 101 slows down when you head south to Pismo from North County. And one of the most important things that we have, important resources, even internationally, is the incredible views that you get when you drive along the 101, when you drive along Grand Avenue, when you drive down 4th Street, even when you drive along the side streets of Grover Beach. And I'm not talking about people's individual views, although that really matters to people, but I'm talking about the view shed, the scenic quality that you have in those towns that's being decimated.
And I will tell you, even Governor Newsom said, we need to really rein in the Coastal Commission. But then at the same time, they're not doing it.
Well, they've all said we need to rein in the Coastal Commission, and I think there needs to be some clarity. And my issue with this too, and is it corruption? Is it not corruption? Is it just a coincidence that Gary Grossman paid $500,000 to the Coastal Commission, and now he gets to build 5 or 6 story height buildings along Grand Avenue in Grover, even though every code and every ethic and every principle is against it? I don't know. Is it a coincidence?
And in this case, he's not giving it to the Coastal Commission.
I see.
They told him that they want him to pay. It's $548,000. They want him to pay the money to Grover Beach for walkways to the ocean and paths along the ocean.
I think Pismo Beach, right? Because we're not getting anything from Gary except for hideous buildings. to
Pismo Beach. So the Coastal Commission in the beginning wanted the money to one way, and they then said you have to pay it to Pismo. And again, he was standing strong, and he had attorneys, and he was fighting. And there's 3 cases. Here's what happens with the Coastal Commission. Let's just talk the Oceano Dunes. They appeal everything. They lose all this stuff, but they appeal. And when it comes to the Oceano Dunes, they have an agreement with state parks. If they lose a lawsuit that has to do with Oceano Dunes, state parks pays it, and they're actually fighting each other. So every time they fight this, and they appeal it as far as they can, the public pays for this.
Tens of millions of dollars.
But the Coastal Commission, anytime anybody checks them out, they just keep appealing. So even though we've had judge after judge after judge say they've overstepped their bounds, and on a seawall with a neighborhood, I think it's up toward the Bay Area, maybe the Monterey County, I can't remember where it was, that case is up for appeal. So even though it's very clear that they're saying, hey, these people have a right to protect their homes, they're not. They're acting as if we can do whatever we want.
Yeah, and I don't think that we are paying our taxes to support these guys to fight with each other in court.
Yes, no, absolutely. And it's a ridiculous amount of money.
It is, because if you think it's not just, it's the courts. They're a public agency that we fund as well. So they're wasting the time of the courts and the money. They're wasting the time and the money of state parks, the time and the money of the Coastal Commission. And there are probably some really constructive things they could be doing. I don't think this is one of them. And I want to go back to that point about the corruption. There are a lot of cases with the Fair Political Practices Commission and other agencies where it's made really clear that even the appearance of corruption is illegal. And it's illegal because what it does is it disheartens people. It disheartens that person who can't afford the seawall, and they quit participating. It disheartens the people of Grover Beach because they figure we can't win because this guy's richer than God. And so it's very, very important for the political process, for the democratic process, even the Republic of America process. It's very important that agencies not even appear to be corrupt, and they certainly do.
Welcome to Sound Off. What would you like to add to the conversation?
I'd like to add the fact that our governor overrode the city councils and the board of supervisors and the people that had these rules set up, and he said, you are going to build high-density housing. And that's what you guys are talking about down there. where they're building high density buildings that weren't approved by the city or probably the county, and we're just getting run over by our governor and the people that are overriding our boards. And what do you think about that?
I thank you for that comment. That's really, really helpful information. I think that that's the excuse that they all use. That is what the city of Grover Beach will tell you. That is what the city of Pismo will tell you. However, there are cities that are fighting this. Morro Bay only allows 20 foot, not even 20 feet heights in their city. So I'm not sure that it's really all that we're hearing.
We're talking about a bunch of things. We started a little bit with the Coastal Commission, and it kind of all ties in. So Gary Grossman paid the Coastal Commission, I think $545,000 and some odd change for a seawall. And there are a number of people that are upset about it. And at the end, we were talking about some of the trolls that were tied to Adam Hill and how they're now coming out. Gary Grossman and Adam Hill were also pretty tight.
Yeah.
And there was, for those that don't know, there's an ongoing criminal investigation into the corruption in this county. That one of the biggest parts of that is the vote for an airport land use change in San Luis Obispo. That's what Adam Hill was in trouble with. That's what John Belcher was involved with. Aaron Oakes was involved with. When you look at the corruption they're all named in.
And the mayor of San Luis Obispo. Not the current mayor, former mayor.
And the indictment is more about the airport land use, and that helped three developers, one being Gary Grossman.
Wow.
They were able to, what they did is they took out the density requirements. So if you want to build near a runway, there's a chance a plane falls. There's very strict requirements. They took away the density requirements, and there were people that made millions, maybe billions, off of these changes in the rules. So they were arguing against 68 homes. I think they built like 400 residential structures. They completely removed the rules. So Gary Grossman is involved with you guys in Grover Beach.
Yeah, he has, I think, 7 projects at least, huge projects in Grover Beach. And so we know that Gary is not immune to these sorts of things, I don't know how to put it, to the kinds of activities that Adam Hill got up to. But we also know that the Coastal Commission's not immune to it, because wasn't it just a couple of years ago that Pismo Council member Eric Hell, who was our Coastal Commissioner, and several other commissioners and Coastal Commission staff were involved in some kind of corruption for which they all were fined or indicted or something.
And I don't know if they called it corruption. It wasn't like a simple bribe. It was more like having dinners and drinks and a lot of... I don't remember the whole thing.
Too close for comfort.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars, and there was issues. He did get fined.
And the appearance of corruption is sometimes as bad as the actual corruption. And so to make that leap, it's not really such a leap to say, well, we kind of know about Gary Grossman. We kind of know about the Coastal Commission and the timing of this. These buildings in Grover Beach and that $500,000 on behalf of the Coastal Commission is curious.
I have a picture from a party at Gary Grossman's house, and it's Adam Hill and his wife, Dee Torres, and Gary Grossman and Eric Howell all sitting on a couch with their arms around each other.
And I had a friend comment on that recently and said, look, I know what I'm talking about. They all look like I can't remember the word he used because I don't do that, but it looked like they were all coked up.
And I don't know. I'm not going to go there.
I don't know either. I don't know. I don't even know the word for it.
I know that when Adam Hill died, I was told that the markers in his body showed that he had a real bad coke habit for many years. That he had markers that were actually changed from long-term cocaine abuse.
Oh, wow.
And he used to nod his head some nights. You'd see him at a meeting.
Oh, my gosh. I had to sit next to him, and I was pretty sure he was doing coke because the nasal sounds that came out of him, the snorts and the grunts, I had to put my finger in my ear because it was so gross.
I was at a meeting and him and his wife were sitting in front of me and they were just nodding, almost in unison for like 3 hours. And I was like, it was a slow city meeting. Maybe it was 2 hours. But I literally looked up on my phone, what makes you nod like this? And the first thing that came up was long-term cocaine abuse.
Wasn't that when he was working with Gary Grossman to get Grossman's projects approved?
I think the one this was the airport land use.
Oh, okay.
It was, but again, that was
the one that Jan Marks was involved in.
But that was for Gary Grossman and Mangano, Avila Ranch Estates or something.
Well, and I was on that committee at that point that made that selection. And what they said is, well, it's okay because it's low-income housing. I'm not quite sure how it being low-income housing makes it okay for planes to crash into it.
And again, what they do in San Luis Obispo, for anyone that hasn't watched this, they go in and they approve something with a ton of low-income housing or workforce housing, low-income housing, and generally by the time they built it, they've taken all that out. They get it approved with that, and then they do plan changes, and then again,
and then they give one of them to the mayor. Sell one of them to the mayor.
Well, they didn't count that as one of them, but other people weren't able to buy that. The other thing they did is they said we're going to have, and they moved people in, and then they evicted them and sold the building to Cal Poly.
Oh my gosh! So it's okay because they're students. It's okay if the planes crash on them because they're students.
Not for students.
Oh,
this was for faculty.
Oh,
they got rid of the workforce housing they promised, and they sold the building to the Cal Poly Corporation, which also is probably going to end up costing them about $500,000 a year in property taxes.
Oh my gosh! So in hindsight, being perfect, Delidio would have been a much better bargain than Gary Grossman in terms of density and appeal.
So what is going on in Grover? Are the people still fighting this, or is it all just getting built?
People are horrified, and in fact, I had phone calls with 3 people this morning who were all very concerned about it because it's simply not something that the people of Grover Beach are in support of in any way. Nobody wants hugely horizontally and vertically massed buildings all up and down Grand Avenue, and it will be lined with these 5 to 6 story height buildings.
Are they residential or commercial?
They'll be commercial on the bottom, residential on the top floors, above the ground floor, but there's no parking. So we're not quite sure how it's going to be commercial if you don't have any parking for your customers. And then what about all the people who live above? You've got one parking space per unit. It's disastrous.
And I noticed that people are already saying there's parking problems at the, what's the property on his property by Madonna Plaza, the new San Luis Ranch.
San Luis Ranch.
There's very little parking there also, and there are complaints.
True. And they're tiny. I can't get into them with my tiny little car. Yeah.
So have they started construction on all 4 buildings?
They've started, one is completed on Grand and 4th, the smallest one, and then there's another hugely massed one that goes all the way from 4th to 5th and all the way back almost, not quite to Rockaway, but almost to Rockaway. So that's almost a full city block. That's in the works right now. There's another one in the works where they had some issues with toxic substances down by the railroad tracks on it would be pretty much between 1st and 2nd on Grand. And then they've bought the property all the way on the north side of Grand, all the way up to 4th Street. And that's all going to be these very high buildings. And then they're going back, too, up into Front Street, up to Newport, with massive buildings and more.
And are they aware that there have been a number of lawsuits about San Luis Ranch, and some people have received settlements because of the construction?
I don't know if people in Grover Beach are aware of that or not. It's something to be aware of. It gives me a real problem as a real estate broker because I've been watching all of this happen, and I don't think I'd be comfortable selling these properties knowing what I know happened at San Luis Ranch. It could be a problem for real estate brokers as well.
And I think most brokers must know that there are multiple lawsuits and there's already been settlements. They would have to.
I would say that I'd say probably 10 real estate brokers in Grover Beach are opposed to these projects. And they're not opposed to low-income. We're supporting low-income housing. They're not opposed to people's property rights, but we are opposed to putting in buildings that violate city code and the will of the people, the will of the community, and offer no parking, that where we know there have been issues recently in San Luis Obispo. So our concern is that people get the right deal.
Debbie, I want to thank you very much for coming in today. It was a great to have you here.
Good fun. If you enjoyed listening today, you might also enjoy my books, The Happiest Corruption, Sleaze, Lies, and Suicide in a California Beach Town, and City Council 101, several others in my Integrity 101 series on Amazon. Just look for Debbie Peterson, Integrity 101. You can also find several other podcasts similar to this one that will help you in your journey in helping your local government become better government. Thank you for listening.